I never felt like I had to play bass for a living. I played it because I was fascinated with it.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I really appreciate you tuning in. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what we're doing here. And I love hearing people's stories. I would love it if you reached out and you told me your story, your personal story. And you can do that by emailing me at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. And I know you'll love today's story about Diana Gannett. And you know, Diana is someone I've been dying to have on the podcast for years. It's such a pleasure to sit down and talk with her. And we got into so many specifics about how she approaches the art and science of teaching, what it was like studying with and then later teaching with Gary Carr, her love for modern instruments, and so much more. Diana has a fabulous website that's just filled with wonderful content on practicing and many other topics. And we get really specific today talking about these topics. So I've linked up to the various pages we're covering, and I'd highly recommend checking out these links so you can get more details about exactly what we're discussing. You'll also hear excerpts from Diana's wonderful solo album, Lady Bass, and check out the show notes for a link to this complete album. And I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Diana Gannett. Here we go.
Come from a musical family?
My grandfather was one of my first teachers. He taught us piano and voice. He was a singer, and he taught in the public schools all through the Depression. So that's why my folks insisted we get a music ed degree as insurance, and I'm glad they did. I think I learned a lot doing that. But yes, he taught us theory and ear training and everything from the time we were little. All in my two older sisters and one younger brother all had professional careers in music. But yeah, he was beloved by us. And so he had also taught my mother voice, and she was a prize-winning opera singer. But he was my father's father. And having my mother's voice was also an early influence on me. She had a contralto voice. And so I think that's actually the basis of my sound, is her voice.
Interesting. You know? I can see that. Well, because you have such a vocal quality to your playing and timbrely and vibrato and phrasing. Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So that was a big influence there. So, yeah. And then I started out on violin in public schools. And I got a violin because I didn't know what a cello looked like. I was supposed to get a cello. And when I found out what a cello was, I took my mother to school and said, "That's what I want to play." Well, that wasn't in the cards. They weren't going to let me play cello. So my older sister played bass, and when I had the opportunity, I switched to bass when I was 14. They needed bass players to play for the graduation in middle school. And then my older sister was my first bass teacher that first summer, and I would practice like 3 hours. I was really fascinated with it. I just loved it.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I loved it. And I went, and then I played both for a while and studied with Eldon Obrecht at the University of Iowa until I graduated high school. And then it was like, I'm putting the violin away. Horrible sound next to your ear. Oh, gosh. I didn't know how my teacher could stand hearing me play. When I was in fourth grade, my violin teacher was Ed Rainbow, who was a bass player and taught at Austin for many, many years after he had taught the public schools there. And I thought that was curious, too, that I had all these bass players in my life. My grandfather was a bass singer, too. And there's something that I really liked about that quality.
what was the experience like of working with Stuart Sankey? You worked with him at Aspen, right?
That's right. Yeah. I had 8 years with Obrecht, and then I went to Aspen for one summer, and that was really interesting. And he was, oh, what a pedagogue. And such a smart man, too. But I remember one lesson in particular. He didn't like my position at all. And he finally got me all set up. He said, okay, now play. And I said, I can't move. But yeah, he was pretty cool. And then he had asked me to be his assistant. But at that time, I was just finishing college, and I got accepted as the first bass major at Yale. And they asked me who I wanted for a teacher. And I said, well, either Gary Carr or Stuart Sankey. And at that time, Sankey moved to Austin, I think. And they got Gary Carr. And I was like, okay. Yeah.
Wow. So what was that? I know it's such a broad topic, but any just takeaways of that experience of first studying with Gary Carr, and maybe just a little bit about what he was like as a teacher, what that experience was like, meeting him and working with him?
Well, he was still very young, the wonder kid, and just a fabulous player. I remember seeing his debut on TV with the Bernstein. Remember the Young People's Guide or whatever those things were? And it was magical to me seeing him play. And at that time, I was 14, and I said, I'm going to study with him someday. And I did. So, yes, he was kind of scary and pretty demanding. I remember I spent that whole first semester on a C major scale. He wanted me to do it right. These teachers. And that was good because I learned a lot. Yeah. So he spent a lot of time with me that he didn't spend with the subsequent students because I was the first one. He was such a natural player, too. And sometimes when I wasn't quite getting what he wanted, I would just hand him the bass and say, play it for me. And that was a great way for me to learn from him because I was very good at learning that way. Also, he was very ahead of his time. So many things that he did pedagogically were a good 10 years ahead of what everybody else was doing. He was just a very evolved player, and it was a delight working with him. I really enjoyed it.
Well, there are all these warm-up techniques. I love to dig into some of that stuff. And I know that a lot of that comes from Gary or Gary's teaching or is associated with Gary. And I'm just curious, do you know where he came up with those warm-ups? Was that from his teachers, or where did that all come from?
Well, he spent time working on those warm-ups with George Bornoff, who's a violin pedagogue. And you'll sometimes hear other people doing vomits on their string instruments, because it's a Bornoff technique. And so it was very well thought out pedagogy. And I really find them very, very useful. When I was still at Yale, we would do them every day, I think for at least an hour. And when I taught at Oberlin, every single morning, we did them every morning and got so much done. It was a quick way to get a lot of concepts across and a good way to focus on how am I playing? And how do I get a sound? And how do I relax while I'm playing? And how do I shift? And what is my body doing? Because most of our training is watching the page, which of course is terrible on your neck. It's watching the page and interpreting the page.
The concept of group warm-ups in general, and you on your website, you kind of articulate this. It's so powerful. I remember doing that with Jeff Braditich when I went to his institute in high school, and we never had any music in front of us, just like you're describing. And I know Dave Moore does the same thing. I even think he's planning on doing something like that for the upcoming ISB convention, like just that group warm-up. I think you describe how it relates to martial arts and kind of how people say warm up, but it's also kind of like technique development. I'd love to just know your thoughts on because I find that really resonates with me. Can you maybe just talk a little about how warm up like that on the bass might relate to like the way that people warm up in martial arts?
Well, the way I have it connected with martial arts is that when I go into the phase exercises, which are an outgrowth of the bass class exercises, it has those 7 different levels, like you have different belts. And in martial arts, well, at least in Aikido, they said all the techniques are equivalent. The very first technique you learn is Shiranagi. And they say that's a black belt technique. So everything's equivalent. And once you've learned a phase, once you've completed a phase or a belt, they say you've just started learning that. You've just kind of got the basics of it down. And you're going to keep working on that your whole life, on everything about it. So in that sense, it's similar to the belts, at least the phase exercises are. Now, in terms of the Carr warm-ups and just a basic class warm-up, I think there's something beneficial to moving together, that it creates a synergy. And I know in Tai Chi class, they're very insistent about everybody moves together. And that reinforces the whole thing. And that's so similar to playing an orchestra. It's open up your soft focus, which we use in martial arts, and be aware of everything around you. Not just that, I'm looking at my music, I'm listening to myself, I'm thinking about myself. I'm blending with everything that's around me. And that's something you can practice in group warm-ups. We also practice drishti, which is yoga, which is keeping focus on one point while you're doing a technique. And wow, do they sound so much better when they do that instead of, looking around, blah, 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 Focus on one point on the floor. Just put little things on the floor and make them watch. So we have a chance to practice some of these things that they can apply in different ways when they're doing their own practicing. But we wouldn't work on those things otherwise. I mean, a lot of those things come from martial arts and yoga and various disciplines like that.
Well, I love that concept of focusing with your eyes on something specific. And I think you talk about that throughout, whether it's your left hand or your right hand, and how that directs the focus.
Yeah. Left hand is a big bugaboo, isn't it? Especially if you get an electric bass player, they're so used to watching their left hand. And I had so much trouble at Iowa getting kids to stop doing that I thought, okay, I'm going to do it myself. And it's like, yeah, I can see why they do that. You really lock into the left hand. But then, if the lighting's different when you're performing or somebody slams a door, your whole cueing mechanism is off because you're only cueing with your eyes. There are times when I'll let them watch their hand so that they see exactly what it is they want to do with their hand, and then they can put that in their head. But yes, I think deliberately watching your right hand makes a huge difference. Have you ever tried that?
I've tried. I've tried and I've also tried watching the contact point, which I find fascinating. To me, that's like. So there's something so objective about watching the contact point. I don't know what it is. I've tried with my right hand. I always get dizzy watching it move back and forth.
Well, the thing I like about watching the right hand is that your head will start moving with your arm, and that means that your whole body is moving with it instead of like this, where it's detached from your whole body. And almost right away, the sound improves. It becomes more lyrical. You start listening to the line instead of thinking about, what am I doing over here? So that's a good discipline, finding a contact point. And another way to practice soft focus when you're practicing is to see if you can see both hands while you're playing. And that also opens you up into taking in more things and keeps you from that pulling forward that does so many bad things to playing. Open up and watch both hands.
I love that soft focus concept. You're not directing your focus. Am I describing it right? You're not directing your focus on one specific element. You're just sort of like taking in the various elements of execution.
Well, In martial arts, it helps to know how they use it there. Because if you doing a technique with a person and you focus on their eyes, say, or their face, that we naturally do, then you're looking at them as a person, as a personality, and they can psych you out. They say, don't look at your opponent's eyes, they'll steal your soul. Because you look like right here when you're doing a technique. And then you see the energy and the mass, and it becomes very impersonal. You're just dealing with energy and mass.
That's fascinating. Don Green, the kind of audition expert guy, wrote Performance Success. I remember he describes, I don't remember if he used that exact term, but like focusing just like a little bit down like that and not directly on. It sounds very similar to that soft focus concept.
That could be. He does incorporate some Aikido centering techniques and so on in his teachings. I've noticed. I don't know if he's an Aikidoka, but.
Well, I was looking through your study sheet that you got with all the 11 steps. And I think you mentioned that you discovered or was inspired through Dorothy DeLay. And I'm curious, how did you first discover this? Were you interacting with Dorothy DeLay?
No, I would have loved to interact with her. My goodness, what an incredible teacher she was. Several of my colleagues have worked with her. And I don't know how I got a hold of the study sheet the first time. It may have been out of a book or so, but I talked to my colleagues about it, and they said, "Oh yeah, we hated that thing." I said, "Oh, I can see why. I'm going to do it." So I've rearranged it somewhat, and of course just tweaked it for base usage and my pedagogy and so on. But I think it's very helpful to go, okay. You might come across it as you mature as a musician and you go, these are all the things I want to be sure I've done with a piece before I go out on stage. Because you go out on stage with a piece and you go, oh, I should have done this or that. So there's a little check sheet to go through. I really do have trouble getting people to be consistent with it and for me to be consistent with it with them. But I think the concept, just having the concept out there is a good idea. It's like, how orderly is your practicing? What are the parameters involved? If you knock things down to one parameter, you can probably master it. But usually we're trying to master several things at once.
Well, and I love how you kind of incorporate different, I don't know if senses is the right word, but I love how you're using your voice in a lot of things, like saying the note names and counting out the rhythms. And that's something that I think Larry Angel, I remember seeing a master class with him and everything was counting for him. Or my wife's harp teacher, the Chicago Symphony harpist, Sarah Bullen, everything was counting and counting out the rhythms. And then even like writing in the fingerings and the bowings. It's just so helpful. And just making a decision, even if you change your decision, just like getting something down on paper.
Yeah, and writing in Gary called it mapping. I got it from him. You have to write in your fingerings and bowings. He made us do it. We all hated it. And I learned so much doing it, because you go, oh, this is what I'm going to do. Oh, this is brilliant. You go back the next day and you go, what was I thinking? But you begin to find out what's in tune for your hand and different kinds of shifting. Oh, this sounds cool and that doesn't, and you don't bother to think about it unless you make yourself. And having a pencil in hand is a good way to make yourself think about it. Gary could sit on an airplane and take a new piece, do all the bowings and fingerings, and that's all he would, that's the way he would do it. Then on, and that's the way he would perform it. I just couldn't do that. I have to keep changing my mind. But it's good to have that starting point. And it's an easy thing for students to let go of. And it's a hard thing as a teacher to keep insisting on it all the time. But one of the nice things about it is that when they have everything written in, I can pick up my bass and then play what they've decided and make suggestions, Plus, it gives me an opportunity to play for them, which is, I think, one of the best ways for people to learn.
because it can be so nebulous with fingerings and bowings. Oh, you can try this, you can try this, we can do this in the D string, and just like making a decision, even if you end up changing it, I feel like as soon as that happens, the progress starts to move ahead because you get out of that sort of phase. I have what I call coffee shop fingerings. I would always sit in a coffee shop and write in my fingerings, and then I'd go sit down on the bass and be like, coffee shop fingerings, these don't actually work.
Yeah, that's great. I find that, now if a student has a problem, I say, well, try this fingering or that fingering. It's, I will come up with tons of fingerings that are possibilities and see how it fits their hand and how it sounds, etc.
You also mentioned that you mark phrases, and I'd just be curious because I've struggled and tried different methods. How do you mark phrases, or how do you have students mark phrases in the music?
Okay, well, Obrecht was big on that, and you'd put a sloping line at the end of the phrase, and sometimes the end of the phrase was the beginning of the next phrase, so that sloping line would intersect, but that's an easy way to do it. Sometimes I'll have them take a transparency and those dry erase markers, and that way they can try out several different ideas of phrasing. And then it gives us an opportunity to talk about, well, what makes it a phrase? How do you decide when a phrase is over? And then that gets them into looking at the construction and the motivic values. And oh my goodness, where the trills are and where the rests are. It's like, of course.
I like that you also assign moods, or talk about assigning moods. Do you do that for like a whole movement or a section? Or, because I love that concept. I try to do that for my own playing, and I try to do that with students too. It seems to really help. How do you do that?
Well, that's again something I got from Gary, and I worked in his library a lot when I was working with him. And you'd find it in his manuscripts. He'd write the emotion for each section or phrase or anything that seemed salient to him. He would write the emotion in. He also wrote in a lot of note names. I love to tell students, I said, well, Gary writes in note names. If that helps you, write it in. And you keep making a mistake, just take the pencil and write something in that'll help you. But yes, I think that helps. And usually the starting point is happy, sad. You have to kind of prod, well, is there another word that comes a little closer? Or listen to it as if you're watching a movie. What's the scene? What do you see? I'll have them play and listen to themselves and then see what it's evoking. And again, that's something that the student has to be fairly well along in a piece before we spend time on that. So much time is spent on just, you made this mistake, that mistake. Let's fix this, let's fix that. But that's the fun part of playing music, is the emotions and the communication.
Because it can be such a hard thing to teach or to kind of get as a student. And I love the way you outline the system that you use, in all these various steps, like even like dynamics and that sort of thing. One thing that I love that you describe is using the counting stick in practicing. And I've tried like pennies and scooching them across the stand and that kind of thing. And it's really a cool system. And the 3 times, once you get to a certain level, can you maybe just like talk about what a counting stick is and how you use it?
Yes. Well, I just went ahead and made the counting sticks. There's a picture of one of them on the website. And then I was handing them out to students at various times, but then they would lose them and break them. So I was like, never mind, you don't get one. But I find it very useful. And I was using it a bunch this morning, and first of all, just forcing yourself to go through a phrase 10 times is incredibly helpful, right? Without any objective at all. Just go through it 10 times. My first husband was a composer, and he wrote a concerto for me. And, I would get it a phrase at a time, and I had to play it in a month. So I would just take each phrase and go through it 10 times to begin to get the sense of it. And it's amazing how far you can get just doing that. So there's that. And then 10 times playing it to a different person each time in your mind.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Very nice. Because it's like, okay, if I'm playing it to like the kids in nursery school, then I'm going to be playing it one way. And so I would up the ante as I would go up to 10 and playing for more and more scary people as I went up. Somewhere in the middle, I'd play for me, and that's usually when it was best. But when my kids were little, I would include them. Yeah, I remember Joseph in particular, who was a very sensitive kid. He'd come wandering into the practice room when I'd be playing for him in my mind. And I'd say, "What is it? Can I help you with something?" And he'd go, "No, I just thought I should be here." Ooh, magic! Because you do play differently when you're playing to kids. And of course, in learning, we're always playing for somebody who's scary and who is going to be judgmental. How do you play to people that aren't judgmental, that just want to be entertained? So there's that. And then the 3 times 3 is so useful. I think I've got that from other string pedagogues somewhere along the way, but it really helps to make it orderly.
Yeah.
Half tempo is about where we can coordinate everything.
Mm-hmm.
We know so much, but we usually go too fast to apply it all at once. And if you find that tempo where you can apply it all at once, that's where you want to be, because then you can relax also. So half tempo is a good guess at that. And then 3/4, and then 3 times that. And speed. That's just a very helpful. I had one student who, when he finally got that, he's teaching, he's a music ed student, but he's teaching in Japan now. When he finally got that, he just wouldn't let anybody disturb him. He went home for Christmas and he said, "Leave me alone." Because he found out he could play incredibly. Yeah, he did a great senior recital. But yeah, it's again a great tool to help a person find out what they actually can do for themselves.
It's such a simple thing, but it's so useful because just like you described, how many times have I been practicing? I think, is that time number 6? Is that time number 7? And just the physical act of like taking a physical object and moving it. There's just like some power in that too.
Yeah, that's why I started actually making an object. Yeah, because I do the same thing. Is that 3 or 8? Oh, I don't know.
You get so many fantastic ideas out there, and I'll link up to all that. But as I was reading, I thought an interesting question I'd pose is, let's say, because I'm sure this happens to you a lot, I just love to know kind of how you would organize maybe an ideal practice day, which who knows how many of those we actually get. But let's say you had a recital in maybe 6 weeks or something like that, and you just had a complete free day. What would your ideal practice day look like in terms of like sessions, how long you practice, what you'd be focusing on?
Oh, well, that's changed over the years a lot. And now I'm a little more careful about using my body. I used to just practice 4 hours straight, and I loved it, Because in India, they say, "Oh, I'm not even warmed up until I've played 4 hours." And, usually about 4 hours, I go, "Geez, I really need to practice." Wow, there's a lot to get done here. So I think, all the advice now is to take breaks. And I think that's probably a good idea because people aren't conscious of how they're abusing their body while they're playing, and to take enough breaks to do that. But when the kids were little, I just didn't dare take a break because then practice time was over. So that's why I just kept going. A quarter of the time it's a good idea to spend a quarter of the time on warmups of some kind. And then I think it was Wanda Landowska her way of practicing was to have 3 piles. It's like the stuff I'm going to have to perform next month, the stuff I really know, it's totally in my memory, and then the stuff I'm learning. And she would spend time on each of those piles, which is something we don't do. We don't spend time reading, and we don't spend time going over the stuff that we know really well, seeing if we can take it to another level, because that influences the rest of our playing. It infects the rest of our playing. So when you're preparing for a recital, yes, you kind of go, I've got to do that. There's so much to do. I've got to get it all. And I'll just, maybe because I've done all my warm-ups, what I'll do for warm-up is just play something really slow, which is also a good warm-up. And start slow and, work on passages, work on problem spots, and so on. And finally get around to running things. Usually, as I get closer and closer to recital, I will be able to go through everything. But I'll just keep doing stuff, no matter how long it takes. I might take 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get through the whole program and do it the way I want. Taking small parts and getting that up to performance level and then making those clumps bigger and bigger until I can do the whole thing in one sitting.
I'd love to just hear a little bit about, you seem to be fond of modern basses, and maybe just talk about what attracts you about modern basses and some of the modern makers, and then maybe just a little bit about that awesome, beautiful, gorgeous bass that you have.
Yes, I've been very fascinated with modern makers because when I was 14, again, I saw a Life article about Carleen Hutchins, and she was carving out this big bass. And again, at 14, I went, I'm going to work with her, And I did. I learned violin making with her, and I helped her finish 4 basses, one of which is in the Museum of Modern Art. And all the science that she put into studying the instruments and what makes them really sound good, I just found very, very fascinating. And then Laura Phillips turned me on to Jean Auray, and I went, wow, he's doing something different, And so I have an Auray bass, and that was really cool. And I have the first Hutchins bass that was ever made. I made a copy of that with Jim Reck, but I really wanted somebody to do the plate tuning, and I wanted the walnut. I always wanted a walnut bass. I wanted somebody that could carve the Venus head, and and it seemed that Mario could do all of that. And so that's when, after my mother died, I had some money from inheritance, and I used that to commission that bass. And then when he and Jean Auray finally met, they found they had a lot of secret things that they did in common. Well, we're lucky. We're living in, I think, the golden age of bass making. So, yeah, why not get a modern instrument? I mean, these things are incredible what they're doing. Plus, I have an old instrument. I have the Landolfi, and I have a Pietro Pelota. It's, again, beautiful, gorgeous old instruments. So, I love those as well. But I'm fascinated with the new stuff. And Mario talked me into getting the detachable neck. I was not convinced with that. And I'm glad he did.
Yeah.
Because I thought it would interfere with the sound, but it helps. So
does it really? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And then you can adjust it any way you want too. So I found the height that I wanted to have the bridge at, and then I made a bridge for that height because I don't like the adjusters on the bridge. Do you know Bruno de Steras?
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. He worked on my bass at Oberlin. I got a chance to get to know him a little bit. Again, lots of ideas about how things work and rather unusual ones, and they work. He does some really good stuff. So next time I see him, I'll have him do some more setting up on that instrument.
Well, it's a gorgeous instrument, and it's got to be so much easier to travel in the reduced case size than the 7-foot tall flight trunk.
Yeah, I was surprised this particular trip because I went to San Francisco and then I went on up to Bellingham for that festival. Yeah, so you can take 2 pieces of luggage, and they have to be under 70 pounds, and this trunk is under 70 pounds. And so the first 2 legs of the trip, I didn't get charged anything.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and on the way back, they charged me for oversize, so that was $200. But, man, I've been charged as much as $600. And then I didn't take it to Paris years ago. I don't go overseas much anymore at all. It's too expensive. Would have been, I think, $900.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And often I pay more for the bass than for the ticket. Yeah, this is a big help. I know that Rufus had the change done to his bass. Oh, that reminds me. I have to check. I'm having the trunk redone by a body shop, and I need to find out how they're doing with that. I don't want to lose my trunk.
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, I've just got one more question for you. I like to ask this of people, especially, I mean, you've done so many things in your career. If you could give your 20-year-old self some advice, or a piece or 2 of advice, what do you think you would give?
You know what? I think I was lucky, just in any case, and I would give the same advice to my students that was my mindset then. I never felt like I had to play bass for a living. I played it because I was fascinated with it. And I think too much emphasis now is on, well, how are you going to make a living? And I think that's the wrong reason to do anything creative. It's like, how am I going to make money out of this? The people that do it, I say, well, is this something you love? Yeah. Okay, then you're going to be okay. And they all end up being okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want music in your life? Yeah. Or is it not that important? And I've seen other people, really promising, wonderful talent, just give it up because they're not winning. And that's what was important to them, was winning. And if that's what's important to you, then you do all the things that you need to do to win at it.
Thanks again, Diana, for the great conversation. It's just so inspiring to talk to you. And be sure to check her out online at Dr. Gannett. That's DrGannett.com. All right, in news and feedback, first of all, last week was Entrepreneur Week, and I hope that you enjoyed this. Sometimes when I talk to people and I start to discover that there's some commonalities between some of the guests, I try to group them together thematically. I had these interviews with Emilio Guarino, Lauren Pierce, Danny Zeman, Peter Seymour, and Hugh Sung, and I just realized that we were kind of talking about similar topics, which is finding your own path in music. And all 5 of these people are, in my opinion, killing it, following their own path and creating opportunities for themselves. And the line I used throughout all of last week was they didn't wait for opportunities to come to them. They went out and created their own opportunities. And I hope that you check these out. If you haven't, just go back, contrabassconversations.com, check them out. They all share certain commonalities, and I think you'll really find that inspiring. Now, coming up in September, starting September 19th, I will be in Prague at the European Bass Congress. And if you are going to be there, let me know. If there's somebody that I should reach out to while I'm there, let me know. I'm so thrilled. I'm so pumped to be able to go to an event like this. And it's been, for me, 7 years of just sitting there wishing I could go to these things, but having work that I have to go to, like many of you have to go to, I fully understand, or school or whatever. So I have the fortunate position right now where I can travel to events like this. So I'd like to do what I can to bring this event to you. And I'll be interviewing people at the event. I'll be, of course, setting up things for the future. And whatever I can do to bring the experience without actually being there, sadly for a lot of you, to you, just let me know, reach out. Any ideas, I totally welcome them. And starting off the fall with this Entrepreneur Week, I want to start things off with a bang. We have got so many guests lined up. You should see my calendar. But just to name a few, we have Hans Sturm coming up. He's going to be our next episode. Then we've got Craig Butterfield coming up, Frank Proto, Shinji Ashima, Sandor Ostland, and another half dozen or so with many more on the way. So I'm just in full-on podcast mode right now, and I'm thrilled to talk to people. I'm trying to talk to everybody ranging from someone who's even in school right now to someone who's had a full career in music like Diana today or Frank Proto. I'm talking to people from every country I can, trying to get the most diverse range of perspectives on the bass possible and topics surrounding the bass and all that kind of good stuff. So thank you for following along. Hope you're enjoying it. I am having a blast. Now, thank you so much to everybody who's written in, like Johann Schuster, who, by the way, won a spot in the Elgin Symphony, my old orchestra. He just won that. So congratulations to Johann. So many people have written in. Nicholas Villalobos, Adam Maloney, David Craig, Jason Bray, David Teague, and so many others who've said hi over email, Facebook, Twitter. Thank you so much for reaching out. I read and I answer every single message I get, and all the ideas I get for this podcast really come from you. So if you're feeling inclined, shoot me an email, feedback@contrabassconversations.com, or hit me up on Facebook or Twitter. A guest idea or any sort of idea for the podcast would be great. And my list of potential guests, just based on listener recommendations, is now over 300. That's just people that have been recommended to me, not even people that I think up on my own. So that's a large number, but an exciting number. Any sort of topical ideas you might have for the podcast, like Entrepreneur Week, which we just did, or I did Gary Carr Week and Luthier Week earlier this year. Any ideas along those lines, I love it. I totally appreciate it. And this is an idea from the listener survey I put out in August. I got a suggestion to feature a smaller market luthier, someone who's earlier on in their journey and what their experience getting into the bass building, the luthier business has been like. And, I think that's a great idea. I featured a lot of the quote unquote big names in the bass building business, like Cole Steen, George and Tom Martin, Chris Thalkeld Wigan, Nick Lloyd, Sue Lipkins, and several others. And I'll continue to feature people like this, but I do think that following along with someone who's earlier in their career journey would be really interesting. And so if you're listening and you are one of those luthiers, or if you know someone who you think would be perfect for that, please reach out and let me know. That would be great. And again, thank you so much for listening to these podcasts. I appreciate it so much. And you're spending your time with me and with Diana. I know she appreciates it. There are many things you could be doing with this time. And I do my best to make this hour plus minus whatever it happens to be this week as valuable as possible. And it's such an exciting time for the bass right now. It's such an exciting world we're living in musically. And I'm just honored that you're taking the time to join me on this journey. So visit our website for more details about my mission for this podcast, what I'm doing here. And I'll see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.